outside of your comfort zone or what you've done before are just problem solving and trying to figure out how to tell this particular story.
In the moment.
Yeah, here's a story and a character that has a certain point of view, and here's the feeling they're having. You're not thinking like, I've done another project before, I'm trying to do that. You're thinking character, story, character arc.
Right.
How do I solve those problems now? And while you're doing it, you don't know if, like you said, if it's a masterpiece or if it's interesting, or if it's you're just trying to communicate.
To me, it's sort of like also, and like talking to Catherine Jones. You know, it's like the idea that you're doing something and it's a dialogue. And I have found that whenever I'm working on a piece of artwork, and especially like with different mediums, if I'm working in acrylic, I'm correcting as I'm painting. I'm literally putting something down and wiping it out and trying to get it to feel right. Whereas watercolor is like chess and checkers. It's like chess because I have to think 10 moves ahead. And so it's a great way of sort of keeping the left brain and like the analytical part and the artistry part kind of going at the same time and keeping oneself out of one's comfort zone. But the idea that you're doing something that where the work is just as insistent of its own integrity and saying, you know, I don't want to go this way. I mean, I just did a piece for a Star Wars book, a Lucas page, and I presented the idea, and then as I was working on it, the story started taking on a whole different quality as I was doing it. And I said, oh my God, I'm gonna have to call him up and tell him that it's going in a whole different direction. It's turning into a whole linear different story. And I literally had to beat it. It was like, it said, no, I want to be this. This is the way it's going to be. And I didn't know when I gave him the idea, I was perfectly content and said, this is what I'm going to do. It wasn't until I started working on it, the work said, you think you know what you're doing? You know, it's like, it's going to be, you know, it's like, it's going to be a girl, and it's like, and here in my head, I'm buying like, you know, like, pants with zippers and button fly jeans and working on teaching football. You know, of course, women and girls can do all that stuff too. But my point is that, you know, you might think it's one gender and it's another, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
That's like the best place to be though, is when it starts to reveal in the process what it wants to be. I mean, like,
Of course, it's very difficult to do that when you're working in a standard comic situation where the editor and the writer expects their vision to be fulfilled.
Right. Yeah. You have that dilemma he mentioned.
So, I mean, with Kabuki, you designed Kabuki specifically to have as much opportunity to follow it wherever it might lead.
Yeah, I mean, the way I do it is I think, to start with, that I have it mostly worked out. I usually don't begin the work until I've had many drafts of the script, and I have a very full and detailed script, and I think I know where it starts, where it ends, and interesting changing points in the middle. But I've been doing it for a while, that you know that on every section of it, there's margin for spontaneity and there's margin for improvement. And you have, like, when Epiphany happened, where you go, oh, okay, that's very different than what I was imagining ahead of time, but that could actually be much more effective. So let me think. You know, a case in point, when I was doing Kabuki, I'd done the first story arc in black and white. It was like almost like a crime noir black and white style. And the first time I did a book in color, a painted book for the very first time, when I drew all the pages and laid them out, it was fairly similar. But once I started putting the paint onto it, and when I work, I lay up all my pages around me against the wall so I can see like how it works as a unit.
As a unit, right? Yeah.
I started looking at, and also sometimes you're thinking one page is one page, but you know you basically are looking at two pages at the same time. So how one page looks next to the other page is incredibly important.
Right.
And when you just have outlined all that or drawn it, it makes sense. But once I was seeing those two pages in color next to each other, I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be. And I thought, like, wow, these colors are too similar next to this page's color, and they kind of cancel each other out. Like, on their own, they look better than they look next to each other.
Right.
That's a problem.
Right.
So then I just started moving all the pages around and thinking, like, okay, this page doesn't look as good next to the page it's supposed to be, but it looks great to this page 10 pages from now. It looks twice as good as I thought it could look next to this page.
Right.
I'm like, wow, how But that's a problem, or is it? So then I check the script and like, can I reaccommodate the script to see if I could tell this sequence out of order or change this around, or okay, maybe I have to change a few panels to make that work and change the story to make that work. But I think I like the story better this way. And then so I started to roll with that, and every time I've done a book in color, once it's painted, I always have to change 1 or 2 pages in terms of the order of how it goes, just because it works better that way.
Well, that kind of reminds me of the story you did with Neil Gaiman, the Sandman story with the goldfish.
Oh, right.
And which is also could take us into some dangerous territory, talking about Mr. Green, where some projects. Well, tell us about the Neil Gaiman.
Well, with Neil, I mean, when I worked with Frank Miller on Elektra, there was very simple, I guess, layout, like what ideas, what he would just say, Garrett's reconstruction. And I was totally into a lot of old antique machinery, so I found so that's basically when I decided to put, Garrett sort of in this shield organizational, like wearing shield underwear, and being put together with giant Singer sewing machine. And so a lot of the stuff that was interesting to me was I would get inspired by Frank's writing, then I would do something with the artwork and just sort of run with it and be inspired. And then Frank would get it and he would rewrite based on my visuals. With Neil Gaiman, I got something very, very simple and abstract, and I just sort of ran with it. And then Neil and Frank had talked, and Neil had actually gone one better and had done what David does. It's like he hadn't just rewritten, he had also started to rework the whole concept of where the pages were going to be. And I think he was quite surprised at what you turned in, and then all of a sudden his whole idea of what the story was changed, and then he kind of started going in new directions with it. Well, yeah, and like when I did Stray Toasters, a lot of the stuff that are done in terms of monthly comics, I did a lot of that stuff when I was growing up, and so a lot of my writing now it's like pulling ideas like balloons out of the air and making a bouquet, that hopefully will lift off.
That was pretty beautiful.
I like that.
That's beautiful.
So if they're good, hopefully they're filled with helium and not lead. But the idea of coming up, I've got a lot of different ideas that are floating around, and they're all kind of coalescing. It's like I'm feeling I'm kind of going into another direction now with because when I did Toasters, a lot of the medium in the U.S. and the response in the U.S. was like, we don't get it. And yet, what was interesting, I found, was that when it was reviewed in the London Sunday Times and the book review in Italy, and it was viewed as very adult, and it was reviewed as a novel. And I realized that sometimes going to Europe, I found that I felt a little bit more in sync and had things in common with Europe, and where the U.S. sort of had the older sort of comics are viewed as a kid's medium. But I think it's less ubiquitous now at all. I mean, there's much more of a egalitarian sort of universality to it, and I think that the main thing is you just want to keep it interesting.
It's all context. That's one of the interesting things. You can do a book and you're seeing it from your own context. And if you're doing it as an independent book and you're writing and drawing it, or you're working on it sort of outside of mainstream, in the U.S. these days it probably is sort of viewed more in its own right of what it is. But it is a trickier situation when you're doing something like that in a Marvel or DC book in a mainstream context. You have to realize, no matter how things are matured, there still is a certain context through which the lens through which they're looking at this, and you can toy with that and have fun with that, as long as you're constantly aware of it. But it's still worth always experimenting with it, and sometimes it's okay if those experiments fail, and other times you can really enjoy that, what they're expecting to see, and then play against it.
Well, yeah, I think, and what David was saying about this other gentleman who I worked with, I did the illustrated biography of Jimi Hendrix, and